When Grandma saw this burglar entering her house, she did something shocking. He sneaked across the hallway, followed by his companions, wondering where the treasures would be hidden. The old lady had most likely kept a hoard of jewelry somewhere. All they had to do now was discover it. The sound of a door creaking disrupted the silence that had fallen over the house that night. That was when their good fortune ran out. They believed they could get away with it indefinitely. This gang of robbers had been on a burglary spree throughout North Carolina's suburbs. They had gone months without being apprehended. They felt invincible and thought that house would be an easy assignment too, but they had no idea who they were facing. The gang has been the most challenging problem for the North Carolina Police Department for nearly a year. They were accused of being behind a rapid wave of crime. Dozens of houses in North Carolina had been broken into and emptied of anything of worth. However, the perpetrators of these crimes appeared untraceable. Nobody could have predicted that a 75-year-old grandmother was about to perform what the entire police department had been incapable of doing. The gang was infamous for their perseverance. They would steal anything they could from the homes they broke into, from TV sets and laptop computers to jewels. They would use different vehicles, masks, and outfits each time to avoid being recognized by camera footage or leaving any evidence in the homes they stole into. Nobody seemed to be able to stop them. They felt above the law by the time this incident took place. The North Carolina Police Department even considered involving the FBI. The thieves felt untouchable. They had no idea that crime always has a punishment, and they would soon face the most terrifying situation of their lives. Karen Davis, 75, is the woman who would prove herself to be the burglar's demise. Her neighbors describe her as a laid-back, pleasant lady who is always willing to help those around her. She was an easy target for the criminals. But there was something unusual about the 75-year-old lady that not many people were aware of. Her main hobby was uncommon for a woman her age. She was a highly dedicated bodybuilder. Despite the fact that she had always been an active lady who enjoyed physical training, it wasn't until she retired that she chose to commit to this discipline. People at the gym were astounded not only by her dedication but also by her accomplishments. Karen, a 75-year-old woman, has the strength of a man in his 20s and a physique that will astound anyone. She even takes delight in winning a few bodybuilding competitions in recent years. Some individuals, though, have expressed surprise at this grandma's unusual interest. She has been the subject of rumors, gossip, and speculation on multiple occasions. Some have speculated whether Karen took any drugs to achieve her current physique. After all, seeing a 75-year-old woman hit marks that a young male athlete could only dream of is not something you see often. On the other hand, Karen has always claimed to be completely natural. It all comes down to devotion, discipline, and proper nutrition, according to her. Karen had always considered her bodybuilding hobby to be precisely that, a hobby. She didn't realize that it would someday help defend her life, her property, and her neighborhood. Of course, the thieving crew had no idea what the outcome of their newest escapades would be. They believed it would be simple when they arrived at Karen's place that night. The thieves broke into the house around 2 a.m. while Karen was sleeping. When they were caught, they hadn't taken anything yet. They were just wandering around the house, looking for anything valuable they could grab. But all of a sudden, Karen woke up. She hadn't even heard anything, but she went to the kitchen to get a glass of water, and that's when it all started. Both the thieves and the granny were shocked to see each other. It took Karen only a few seconds to get over the confusion of seeing some masked strangers in her house. As it was reported later on, the two parties got into a physical altercation right away. But no one could have ever predicted what its outcome would be. Apparently, 3 of the 4 members of the gang were knocked out. The last one was tackled and pinned down to the floor by Karen until the police made their appearance. When the officers first saw the scene after walking through the door, they were amazed but probably a bit ashamed as well. Who could have thought that a 75-year-old lady had been capable of doing what they had been unsuccessfully trying to do for months? However, according to Karen, the officers were really kind and thankful for her actions. They even asked her to take some selfies with them. They also asked her if she was all right, and she assured them that she hadn't even got a single bruise. Clearly, it was the robbers who got the worst deal from the altercation. Finally, justice was done, and the gang that had been terrorizing North Carolina for months got caught. The 4 of them are currently waiting for trial. And as is to be expected, Karen is proud of not only having served the community but also of her bodybuilding hobby, her effort, and her dedication paying off in such a severe situation. But this wasn't the first time a granny had given some would-be thieves a rude awakening. We've all heard stories about the elderly being victimized because they are easy targets. They are favorite targets for phone scams, door-to-door sales, and even simple thieves. They are so vulnerable that they get targeted at the most amazing moments. When Karen was accosted by three men during a shopping trip, the narrative pretty much writes itself. However, what they didn't realize was that she was no ordinary granny. She had a few surprises up her sleeve. 77-year-old Winifred Peel from a small town near Liverpool doesn't look different from any other older woman. She keeps herself fairly busy in her retirement. She enjoyed the less hurried pace of her life and happily went about her daily business. Growing up, Winifred had always led an active lifestyle. She loved to help her father, who loved to tinker and fix things at home, and she became involved in various sports. However, something stuck with her through all the years and, as it turned out, may have saved her life. While on her way to her favorite cafe for some tea and cake, Winifred passed a group of young men near the bank. They were standing around arguing with each other, but she didn't give them much thought. However, as it turned out, she should have paid more attention to them. While on her way, she remembered that she needed to find a gift for her best friend's daughter. She quickly went into the shops and found the perfect gift, only to discover she didn't have any cash. Since it was a small town, there weren't any banks nearby, so she set off at a brisk pace to the closest ATM. After several minutes, Winifred finally spied an ATM and began to approach. As she drew closer, she began to fumble in her bag, looking for her bank card. She couldn't find the card, so she stopped short of the ATM so she good searched for her bag properly. It was while staring into the depths of her bag that she became aware of a shuffling behind her. She had no idea that her brief hesitation was about to become a defining moment in her life. She looked up and her face flushed. Hearing the shuffling behind her, she immediately assumed she was in someone else who wanted to use the machine's way. She turned to see a woman behind her, patiently waiting for her to go about her business. Knowing she'll be a moment, Winifred turned to the woman and said, "You go ahead, I'll be a minute." The woman thanked her and stepped up to the machine while Winifred searched her bag. Little did she know that danger was fast approaching. Winifred had always been a fairly trusting person. She always believed in the good in people and lived by the motto, "Give kindness, receive kindness back." As she stood there searching for her bag, she noticed several shadows looming over her. She didn't give it much thought as she rummaged through her bag, finally producing her bank card. However, that would turn out to be a mistake. Winifred slipped her card into the machine and followed all the normal prompts. She typed in her PIN code and pressed the continue button. It was at that moment that felt she herself knocked to the ground as her vision blurred. Dazed and confused, Winifred didn't know what's going on. She tried to get her bearings and make sense of what was happening. One thing was clear, she was in danger. However, how would she be able to defend herself? Everything had happened in the merest blink of an eye. From the shadows, entering her PIN, the shuffling, and finding herself on the ground. It had all happened so fast that she hadn't really had time to register. She felt the pain shoot through her body as she fell to the ground. That's when the adrenaline kicked it. She felt it surge through her as she shook off the pain. Thinking, "You're not taking my money, young man." She got up and rounded on the man, doing something unthinkable. Seething with anger, she sprung back to her feet. Before they had the time to react, she was on top of them. It was the same three men who'd been making a scene at the bank earlier. Clearly, they thought they'd have more luck hassling old ladies. But Winnie was a poor choice of target. Lunging at the closest, she grabbed his head and used her full weight to wrestle him against the wall. The seconds seemed to have frozen and Winnie's face was unreadable. No fear or anger. In that instant, the thieves flew right at her. Winnie was old but very strong, after all. 6 pairs of rough hands tried to seize her, but Winnie's right hand shot out and landed on one thief's face. Panicking, his accomplices wrestled him free, then sprinted away down the road. Still full of adrenaline, Winnie started to give chase, before the gravity of the situation finally hit her at full force. "It was only afterwards that I realized what I'd done and started shaking," she said. "What if he'd had a knife? I might not be here today thinking she'd let them get away." She cursed to herself. But it wasn't over yet. Hearing the noise, some people nearby turned the corner to see Winifred looking distressed. Running to her aid, she waved them off, instead insisting they catch the assailants. While one person stayed with her, the other two hurried off around the corner, hoping to catch a glimpse of them before it was too late. The unlucky trio of teenage criminals Felix Stoica, 19, Piper Dumitru, 18, and Florin Gablescu, 18, were looking for easy targets that night, but underestimated Winnie's determination not to be taken advantage of. They had driven to Bromborough from Manchester in search of vulnerable prey to target, but they got a lot more than they bargained for. The chase was short-lived. The Good Samaritans had been just a touch too late to see where the attackers had run to, but the police weren't far behind. In her furious counterattack, Winnie had caused a fair amount of damage. The wall and floor surrounding the cash machine was marked from the attack, with the trail leading off around the corner. For years, Winifred had visited the gym 4 times a week. As she grew older, her routine had become less intensive, yet her persistence ensured she was still fighting fit. On the day of her attack, her body took the reins, using every ounce of strength to defend herself. Unleashing her anger, she had ensured that the would-be thieves would be brought to justice. Unfortunately, this happens more often than people think. But thankfully, another grandmother in Texas was equally as ready to take on her attackers. A Texan grandma's home was broken into by two masked men. As soon as they saw the woman, the two of them realized what a huge mistake that was. They had broken into the wrong house that day. Two men had broken into Grandma Rose's house to try and steal her valuables, but the old lady had other plans for the burglars. Grandma Rose was a 60-year-old woman living alone in Harris County, Texas since her husband John passed away 3 years ago. The old woman had a quiet life and tried to stay as active as possible. While her daughter helped her once in a while, Grandma Rose was used to taking care of everything by herself. But would she manage to take care of what would happen next? In the area where Grandma Rose lived, there had been more robberies than usual. All her neighbors were worried and tried to take extra security measures. Grandma Rose decided to do something to protect herself as well, but it wasn't easy. She was on a tight budget and couldn't afford a house alarm or something sophisticated. Since Grandma Rose was living all alone, she had to be extra careful at all times. She didn't want to have intruders break into her home to steal her stuff or even harm her. Lately, the old woman was feeling the effects of the recession that hit the entire country. She couldn't afford everything she wanted anymore, and times were tough. The woman had to prioritize her medicine and utilities above else. Because of that, when she was faced with the possibility of losing her things to a robbery, she did something radical that surprised the entire country. The old lady worked almost all her life. She had her first job when she was 16 years old, and continued to work well into her 50s until she retired due to health problems. The grandma kept herself active and worked on her little backyard garden whenever she had the chance, but she couldn't do as much anymore. Still, being in her twilight years, she expected some peace and quiet. Sadly, that would not be the case. Regardless of how little monetary value her things had, she treasured them deeply. These weren't just things. They were memories of a beautiful life she built with her beloved husband in that home. So when two men tried to rob her of the most valuable things she had, the old lady had the perfect response for them. After all, those things were more important to her than her own life. Rose had always been a strong-willed woman, and everyone who knew her loved her for that. But her personality would get her in a lot of tricky situations. The two men who invaded her home didn't know who they were dealing with and what she was capable of if challenged. Even if she was quite old, Grandma Rose was not the woman to back down from danger. Two local men had the awful idea of getting into people's homes and stealing their valuables. They eyed some quiet neighborhoods where mostly old people lived, thinking it would be a piece of cake. Little did they know, it would be the biggest mistake of their lives. The house they'd pick was not so easy to rob after all. Two young men broke into the wrong house that day. They thought no one was home. Or maybe it was someone who wouldn't put up a fight and just let them do their thing. They thought it was going to be an easy getaway. They couldn't be more wrong. Grandma Rose had a different plan than them and wouldn't back down so easily. The burglars forced their way inside Rose's house with a crowbar and slowly entered until they reached the living room. They were looking for valuables. At first, they thought no one was home as it was completely quiet, but the two would soon find out that Grandma Rose had something special prepared for them. As soon as she heard them, she decided to take action. Grandma Rose quickly withdrew to her bedroom, where she had hidden an old gift from her late husband in a box. It was the thing that would save her. The old woman then headed to the living room and confronted the two men. When they saw her coming at them, the burglars froze on the spot. They thought the old lady must be crazy. But she wasn't planning on letting anyone take her beloved treasures. When Grandma Rose was face to face with the burglars, she pointed something at them and yelled to leave the things and go away. At first, they didn't see what it was, but then they realized the old lady had a weapon. The thing is that they were also armed, but once the old lady fired a shot, the two burglars freaked out and started running. The old woman fired several rounds at the suspects while they fled the scene, hitting one of them. The suspect collapsed and passed away in the woman's front yard. The other man managed to get away by jumping a fence, and police subsequently initiated a search to apprehend him. Grandma Rose was not harmed in the break-in. The story of how Grandma Rose defended her home made the news all over the country. People who saw the story being shared on social media congratulated the old lady and said she did the right thing. Rose was still shaken by the event, and she never intended for things to play out like that, considering that one of the burglars lost his life in the process. But when you decide to rob a house in Texas, that's a risk you must consider.